The fluorescent lights of Los Angeles International Airport hummed, a monotonous drone that mirrored the apathy simmering within Ethan Kopech. His uniform felt like a costume, not a symbol of service. Years ago, he had dreamed of wearing a different uniform, the sharp blue of the LAPD, but that dream had crashed and burned. The police academy had been a soul-crushing experience. He'd failed their background check, concealing the truth of his father's criminal record. The academy rejection had left him adrift, and he'd landed, uninspired, in the Tsar, manning security checkpoints, a cog in the machine. His wife, Nora, a bright spot in the grey of his life, had tried to rekindle the fire within him. Her pregnancy had added a layer of urgency to her pleas. "Ethan," she'd said on that Christmas Eve, her hand resting gently on the swell of her belly, "you need to try again. You were born to protect people. You need to apply to the police academy again." He had brushed it aside, but her words had burrowed into his conscience, a silent nagging. Instead of chasing the dream of the badge, he'd opted for the mundane. He'd requested a transfer to a baggage scanning lane, hoping to showcase his merit with a promotion to a less strenuous role. He wanted to demonstrate his worth without any further personal risk. His supervisor, Phil Sarkowski, a man whose jowls seemed to sag with every passing year, had granted his request with a skeptical grunt. Sarkowski, ever a creature of habit, saw Ethan as a paper pusher, another face in the sprawling bureaucracy of airport security. He didn't see the spark of potential, the dormant yearning for something more. Ethan, for his part, simply wanted to clock in, do his job, and make sure no one could harm his wife and his unborn child. That night, the scanner hummed, a conveyor belt moving luggage filled with the unknown. It was a monotonous ballet of handbags, backpacks, and suitcases, each one a potential threat, each one seemingly the same. But then it happened. As Ethan watched the screen, a small, almost imperceptible buzz echoed in his ear, followed by a voice, cold and precise. An earbud, not standard Tsar equipment, had suddenly come to life in his ear. "Officer Kopech," it hissed, "listen carefully. You will let a specific case pass through the scanner. If you don't, your wife will die." The voice belonged to someone known only as the Traveler, a name that sounded like a ghost story rather than a threat. He described the carry-on, a nondescript black bag. A picture flashed before his mind of Nora's smile, of the new life growing within her. Ethan felt a chill that went deeper than the airport's air conditioning. He knew this was no prank. This was a threat, a life or death scenario, and he was suddenly in the center of it. The Traveler's voice was the puppeteer, and Ethan, the unwilling marionette. A second voice, the Watcher, chimed in through the earpiece, monitoring Ethan's every move, ensuring no deviation from the script. The Watcher seemed to know everything, even his thoughts. It was a chilling demonstration of power and control. Ethan attempted to alert the authorities, using subtle hand signals, a raised eyebrow, a seemingly casual conversation with his colleague, Lionel, but every attempt was thwarted. The Watcher knew. Panic began to gnaw at Ethan's edges. He needed to warn someone, but not in a way that would immediately draw the Watcher's attention. With a shaking hand, he grabbed a piece of paper and a pen. Invisible ink, a trick from his father's past, seemed the only safe way to communicate the danger. Lionel, ever the jovial companion, had been the closest to Ethan during his shift. He'd often listened to Ethan's frustrated rants, so there was no reason to suspect him to be disloyal. Ethan handed Lionel the message under the guise of a random paper with a number on it. But before Lionel could fully register the significance, before he could even raise the alarm, he collapsed. His face turned grey, and he gasped for breath. He clutched his chest, his eyes wide with terror. Ethan watched, helpless, as the life drained from Lionel's face. The Traveler's voice was cold and triumphant in his ear. "Akhenaten," the Traveler said. "Effective, isn't it? A tiny dose to prevent your colleague from alerting the authorities. It can be quick and precise." The shock rippled through Ethan. He knew that he had stepped into a world of cold calculation, where human life had little value. He tried to remain composed, to keep his grief at bay. But his hands trembled as he continued to do his work, knowing he was a pawn in someone else's deadly game. His erratic behavior, the tremor in his hands, the pale face, didn't go unnoticed by his friend, Jason, another Tsar officer, who came to his help. Jason, with his easy smile and laid-back attitude, thought that Ethan was just overwhelmed. He took over his position, seeing his best friend in distress. The traveler, however, had other plans. Ethan got another call. "Your friend Jason. He's in the line of fire too, if you don't follow my instructions. Keep the process going." The threat hung heavy in the air. Ethan had to act quickly. He needed to protect Jason, even if it meant making himself look foolish. He fabricated an excuse, accusing Jason of having alcohol at his station, an infraction that would get him removed from the floor immediately. Jason, confused and hurt, was escorted away. The traveler had his way again. A man with a boarding pass bearing the name Mateo Flores approached with a black carry-on. This was the person the traveler had been waiting for. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as he scanned the bag, his eyes darting from the screen to the man's face, looking for any clue of the danger that was about to unfold. He let the bag pass through, a betrayal of his oath to protect, a concession made under duress. The traveler's voice filled his ear, colder than ever. "Good, Officer Kopech, you're learning. Now you know what's inside. Novichok, a lethal nerve agent, incurable once it gets into the system." The revelation hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. Novichok, a weapon of mass destruction, the stuff of nightmares, was now moving through the airport because he had allowed it. He needed to find a way out, but the traveler was always one step ahead. He was a master of control, manipulating people like puppets on a string. Meanwhile, Detective Elena Cole of the LAPD was investigating a double homicide. The victims had been found dead with strange symptoms, their bodies showing signs of exposure to something deadly. Her investigation had taken her down a dark path, a path leading to a smuggling operation, a path that had now begun to intersect with Ethan's world. Elena had discovered that the victims had been involved in smuggling Novichok into the country. She was tenacious, methodical, and driven by an insatiable thirst for the truth. As she pieced together the puzzle, she came across a strange 911 call, an aborted message, a call made from the airport by a Tsar officer named Ethan Kopech. It was the loose end she needed to pull. Elena alerted the Department of Homeland Security DHS, connecting the dots between the smuggled Novichok and the 911 call. She knew that something was about to happen, and the threat was close to home, at the very place where thousands of people crossed every day. A terminal-wide sweep was ordered. Every bag was inspected, every passenger was questioned. Ethan, despite being under constant surveillance, managed to add Mateo's name to the list of passengers flagged for further scrutiny. This small act of defiance was a beacon of hope in the darkness. The traveler's voice crackled in his ear, full of suspicion. "You're meddling, Officer Kopech. I don't appreciate that." He ordered Ethan to the restroom where he confronted him. Ethan, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, saw a moment to strike. He grabbed the traveler's plastic gun, a fake, a mockery of a real weapon, but still, a small advantage. He now held the weapon with his shaking hand, but the traveler was unfazed. He knew that Ethan was still just a novice in this game. "You think you are in control," he laughed, and with a calculated move, he armed the Novichok bomb. It was a race against time now. Every second brought the airport closer to a catastrophe. Ethan found himself at a crossroads, forced to make choices that went against everything he believed in. He knew he could not hand Mateo over to Sarkowski to be inspected, not until he had a clear plan. So he interrupted, holding Sarkowski and Mateo at gunpoint, creating another chaotic situation. It was a desperate gamble. During the confrontation, Mateo, a man just as terrified as Ethan, stabbed Sarkowski, fatally injuring him. It was a gruesome reminder of the stakes. Mateo then revealed the truth. He, too, was being forced to carry out orders, and the Watcher was holding his husband, Jesse, hostage. They were both victims of the same cruel web, connected by fear and forced by desperation. The traveler's voice now was a mix of impatience and calculation. "Reset the bomb, Officer Kopech." "You have to do it," Ethan, guided by the traveler's instructions, began working on the device. With time ticking away, he managed to reset the bomb, a temporary reprieve from certain doom. But the reprieve came with a price. Once the reset was done, Mateo was ordered to kill Ethan. He reached for the plastic gun, the very same fake weapon that Ethan had used. But the weapon overheated and exploded in Mateo's hand. He was dead instantly, a casualty of the traveler's ruthless machinations. The traveler then turned his attention to Nora, ordering the Watcher to kill her. Ethan, reeling from the loss of Mateo, managed to grab his phone and warn her. He had to save his family. He had to stop this nightmare, not just for himself, but for everyone. Nora, pregnant and vulnerable, was suddenly thrown into the midst of a deadly game of cat and mouse. She narrowly evaded the Watcher, who was ultimately killed by Jesse. He had come to rescue Mateo, only to witness a murder scene. This gave him strength to act and take down the Watcher. Detective Cole, racing to the airport with DHS agent John Alcott, had a strange feeling, a gut feeling that things were not adding up. She had pieced together all of the information, but the DHS agent, a stranger to her, seemed too eager to believe her. The imposter, as she discovered, was one of the traveler's accomplices. He had been sent to eliminate her, but Elena was a match for him. In an act of self-preservation, Cole killed Alcott. Arriving at the airport, she found Ethan, his face streaked with grime, his eyes filled with fear and determination. He confirmed the active threat. Elena wasted no time. She alerted the LAPD, initiating a terminal shutdown. The airport went into lockdown, a cacophony of alarms, flashing lights, and desperate screams. As the chaos unfolded, Cole and Ethan teamed up, a cop and a TSA officer, two ordinary people forced to become heroes. Together, they began to decipher the traveler's plan. They found out that his target was a congresswoman, a vocal advocate for increased weapons funding, who was on a flight to Washington, D.C. The traveler's plan was intricate and diabolical. He intended to frame Russia for the Novichok attack, knowing that it would guarantee congressional approval of massive defense spending, enriching his backers, the weapons manufacturers. It was all about money, a ruthless pursuit of profit at the expense of countless lives. The traveler had boarded the flight, thinking his plan was foolproof, unaware that Ethan had switched the bomb into an identical, but larger, suitcase. He had managed to do that while the chaos of the lockdown was unfolding, a brave move that no one else had anticipated. The bomb was now in the plane's cargo hold. Ethan, a reluctant hero, infiltrated the hold, determined to disarm the bomb before it could detonate. Meanwhile, Nora, who had managed to make her way to Cole, persuaded her to allow the flight to take off. It was a risky gamble, but necessary to keep the traveler from realizing the deception. Ethan, working against time, his hands trembling, began dismantling the bomb. The traveler received an alert, his arrogance shattered by the knowledge of Ethan's betrayal. He confronted him, gun pointed at Ethan's head. The deadly nerve agent loomed over Ethan, but Ethan was no longer the hesitant TSA officer he had been just hours ago. He had faced death, seen the consequences of his choices, and found a strength he had never known he possessed. Before the traveler could rearm the Novichok, before he could escape using a parachute, Ethan locked him inside an airtight refrigeration unit, trapping him with the very nerve agent he had wielded. The traveler, the ghost in the system, was dead. The plane, now safe, returned to the airport. The nightmare was over. The threat, once so immediate, was gone. The investigation that followed was extensive and complicated. It revealed the depth of the conspiracy, the network of corruption that had allowed the traveler to operate with such impunity. The weapons manufacturers were exposed, their greed laid bare for the world to see. 1 year later, Ethan, Nora, and their child passed through at our checkpoint. The mundane task was now a reminder of all that they had been through, all that they had overcome. They were on their way to Tahiti, a well-deserved vacation, traveling with Jason and his family. The airport was no longer a place of fear, but a gateway to new experiences, to a new chapter in their lives. Ethan placed his LAPD badge in the scanning tray, a silent testament to his renewed ambition, to the dream he had once abandoned, a dream he was now ready to pursue. He was no longer just a TSA officer. He was a hero, a protector, a man who had stared death in the face and emerged stronger. The future stretched before him unknown, but filled with the promise of hope and the quiet strength of a man who had finally found his true purpose. The events of that Christmas Eve had changed Ethan and Nora, and even those who had been touched by their heroism. The scars remained, a reminder of the fragility of life, but they also served as a beacon of hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The city, once teetering on the brink of disaster, was now more vigilant, more aware of the shadows that lurked within the system. And Ethan Kopech, the reluctant hero, finally found the path he was always destined to follow, a path of service, protection, and justice. This story, with its many threads of deceit, sacrifice, and courage, served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, the smallest spark of hope can ignite a brighter tomorrow. The fight was not always easy, but it was always worth fighting for. The system was flawed, but it was not beyond repair, and it needed people like Ethan, with his integrity and commitment, to make it better. The journey was not over, but a new chapter had just begun.